My name's Brian Sharp. I'm the CEO of Onset Communication. We build technology for the film and television industry. I'm co-hosting with Lynn Hilden, who works with me out of Atlanta, Georgia. Hi, Lynn. I'll just do a couple of housekeeping things real quick. If you have questions, if you can do it in the Q&A feature within Zoom, then we can get to them during the conversation, and then we'll have a section at the end where we can, any questions we missed, we can go back to and re-ask the panel. We'll start with introducing the panelists, and then I'll have some opening remarks and ask the first question to the panel, and the bulk of the conversation will be the discussion around what's life going to be like when we go back to work post-COVID-19. Then I'll do a little section on what we're offering at Onset Communication as a solution for helping us get to back to work sooner, and then we'll finish off with that Q&A. So Lynn, if you want to start off with introducing the panelists.
Hi guys, thanks for joining. I'm very excited to be here virtually and have the opportunity to listen to our panelists discuss what's going on in our industry. So right to it, we have Mr. Tom Luse, who lives here in Georgia with me. However, he just mentioned he has production working in Halifax and New York, as well as the artist in residence at Georgia State University's new Creative Media Industries Institute. And we may all know him from his 9 years serving as the leader of The Walking Dead. Moving on, we have Mr. Michael Kennedy. He is a director. He has completed 16 feature films and over 230 hours of primetime television in both drama and comedy.
Dramedy, good. I'll take it.
And then we have Rion, who's a Canadian-based cinematographer, and he's worked in both premium branded commercials. He's worked in feature films and television. And we look forward to his perspective on the crew experience and how we can get back to work on set. And finally, we have Kent Parker, who is a first AD, a producer, and a director, and he has worked on over 500 broadcast television commercials, as well as digital content, documentaries, sports, and interactive campaigns. So thank you guys all for joining us. I know we eagerly anticipate your perspective on what's going on and how we can work together to get back to work, and how the Onset Communications tools may be able to help facilitate some of the new world we will be living under in the hopefully very near future. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. So I think I want to have a positive spin on this conversation. I think while it's remains kind of unknown when exactly we will get back to work, it's likely that we'll get back to work in a staggered way throughout the world. And I think that there's a real opportunity for Canada to be one of those places that comes back to work sooner than other regions. But what will make that still difficult is you'll have restrictions on travel and movement across the country and between the countries, where remote access might be a critical tool to returning to work across all genres. And while there's this high demand for content that we have, which is enormous, figuring out how to return safely to production, I think, is imperative. And I think, and what we've developed through our technology, which we're calling offsite access, can facilitate conversations across borders, especially around creative conversations. But to begin the conversation, there's been a lot of concern about how set will function in this post-COVID-19 era. And from your different perspectives as a producer, director, DP, and first AD, what do you see as the big issues and challenges to getting us back to work and what we're facing? Tom, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tom Luse. I do have pants on. I am in a room that I was in for about a month because I had the virus, and I'm fully recovered and I am out of quarantine. And it never was really bad for me. I'm very fortunate. But I know that this is a real, having gone through it, I know the concerns and the protocols just here in the house with my family to keep them from getting sick is pretty strong protocols. So, but as Lynn had mentioned, I am involved in a couple of shows as a consulting producer, a show that shoots in Halifax, Nova Scotia is the one I'm probably going to focus on here because it's an international show, and a lot of your work in Canada is international based. And then I'll talk a little bit about a show in New York, just as a kind of a different set of problems. The first thing we obviously have to do is our business does not matter compared to the health of everybody out there. And our healthcare workers, keeping them able to take tests first before we take tests makes a lot of sense. To have, as we, especially in our country, which is far behind in testing, we have to make sure that we have a safe environment just to move around in, and then we can talk a little bit more about getting back to work. And so we're still in that first step. I just finished a conference call today with people around Canada and in the US about our show in Canada. And so basically, the first step is to make sure that the government is going to allow us to move forward. That's got to be the first step. And they have other priorities right now. We don't want to even call them and get into our small problems until they have a better handle on the larger problems. So in Nova Scotia, luckily, they're quite ahead of the game compared to other places. There are about, let's see, I have it here, 364 cases as of today, confirmed. There have been 2 deaths. They have 11 people hospitalized, 5 in ICU. And they've had, for the last few weeks, pretty severe restrictions on movement with major fines if they find you out in public unnecessarily. Businesses who are operating have to be approved. And if they're not, they can be shut down and fined a great deal of money. They are testing. They're up to 1,000 tests a day already. They've had a little social spread, but not too much. So the question then is, how do we, once they feel like they have it suppressed and they say, okay, we can start opening things up. We can have, right now it's groups of 5. There's a 2-week quarantine to come in to 5 or less. I'm sorry. There's a 2-week quarantine to even come in to Halifax, into Nova Scotia. So in other words, if you fly in from Toronto, you have to be in quarantine, self-quarantine for 2 weeks. You have to also, there's restrictions on flying in from the United States currently at all. International flights are banned without special government release of restriction. So there is, the international border has to be opened up, and that has to be agreed to. And there are other protocols as well. So how do we can't move forward realistically until obviously we can fly people in from the States. We have a few, our show is very much a Canadian based show. So essentially we have both, we do have a few people from the States that do need to come, a couple of our creatives, and have to come in from the States. I'm already decided I'm going to limit my travel into Canada, period. Maybe, well, it's going to be 6 trips. It'll probably be 2. And both those trips will be longer trips because traveling in and out is going to be a problem. But for us to be able to move forward, I can't really ask for people to wait 2 weeks to go to work. So we have to kind of wait to see what happens with that particular restriction. Now, I can make that work for a writer, a showrunner, maybe even a director. But for my regional cast, many of whom are from Toronto, that means I would have to hold my entire cast, our entire 80-plus day shoot in Halifax, which is problematic at best for us, the unions, for everybody else. So we have to.
For the quick question. Mm-hmm. So I know when we were talking about it before, you were talking about your key role as a producer is risk mitigation. I'm actually more curious about the risk mitigation once we're back to work, once we're able to get back to work, and that discussion around, you know, what our work practices might be that are different.
That's a great question. So let's assume we get past all these things. I think that at the very least, we're going to have a medic when you show up to set in the morning, there'll be a medic taking your temperature. I think when you go to breakfast, you'll walk up to a table, you'll order what you want to order. It'll be put on the table separately. You will take that and go away. That same procedure will be happening if you go to Crafty. This is what we're surmising right now. There is no guidance yet. I'm sure there will be from the unions. I'm sure there will be from the studios, but there isn't yet. So we're trying to get ahead of the game by coming up with these protocols. There'll be probably an additional person who does nothing but wipe things down all the time, or people, depending on the shoot. I think that anybody that touches an actor, and maybe everybody, period, will be wearing gloves and masks. The problem with gloves, especially though, is they don't necessarily stay COVID-free. So it's going to be a hand washing technique, but I think for actors, you're going to see gloves and masks on hair and makeup, on wardrobe, that anybody that touches an actor, because that is the kind of litmus test. That's the canary in the coal mine. If an actor goes down, you're shut down.
Yeah, that's a good segue into Michael's opinion on this too, because I know, Michael, you're the kind of person who likes to be on set, be right next to the camera, staring at what the actor's doing, and within 6 feet of them. So, what's your opinion of this?
Oh, Michael.
Oh, your mic is off. Unmute.
There. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there we go.
Can you hear me?
Thanks.
Good.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me on the panel. Although I question your intelligence about choosing me to be on this panel, first of all, because I'm not that bright, and secondly, as some people know, yeah, I don't even like Video Village. You know, I like to be. They always have to give me like the little monitor, and I'm sitting on a Apple box, you know, just a few feet behind the dolly. I like to see everything on the set and be within sight of the actors at all times. But nevertheless, I can see how everything's going to change, and I might be able to provide some comments. I mean, this whole crisis, everybody wants to know when we're going to get back, and when we get back, what it's going to be like. And when I talk about filmmaking and in particular directing, I usually comment that I only have one rule in directing, and that rule is 2 words: it depends. So everything depends, and that's actually a beautiful thing about the industry, though, because my view also is that every shot in every scene, every day, and every show is unique. And film crews are really special in that every day they confront unique challenges, and with creativity and collaboration, they find a way to get it done safely and creatively. We've been doing it for over 100 years in film sets, right? They find a way. So with this whole COVID thing, there's no going back, there's only going forward. This is a wake-up call to the fragility of our system and employment for our production process. One good thing is that we've just gone through a couple of really interesting examinations of our processes and protocols. One was in regard to greening. You know, does everybody really need their own plastic water bottle, and do we need all this paper, etc.? We went through a whole examination, every department of all their processes, and smart people cut them down just to be like, what do we really need? Another interesting revolution we went through was in regard to sensitivity to gender and sexuality issues, and examining all our practices and being more aware of how we do things, how we act, what we say, and what we do, where we go, how we relate to people physically and with dialogue. So I think this is just another, maybe bigger, examination of our processes that we're prepared to take on. And, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and with creative collaboration, we'll find a way. Now, I'm interested in your positivity slant, Brian, because I also agree that I think Canadians are in a great position to actually do well or do better than most as we come out of this crisis, you know, because we are used to being nimble and flexible. We are used to lower budgets. We are used to smaller crews. We are used to non-studio shooting, which might be the most difficult thing to handle. Now, I know going out on location and going into a restaurant or a school or something is still going to be problematic, but shooting out in exterior in the wild, you know, it might be actually one of the best places to shoot. So I like our chances, and I, you know, really love and admire film people, and I'm frankly looking forward to how we're going to, you know, collaborate creatively and find ways to come back together. For another reason why you shouldn't bother having me on this panel is that I actually think I can do my job and maintain 6 feet. Even though I don't want to, I can do it. And by the way, just today I read an article about the Premier of Quebec talking about putting Quebec back to work. And one of the things he said was that he might open up various industries if they can assure him that people can maintain the social distancing of the 6 feet. So that's going to be one of the first challenges of film crews, is to look at everything we do. And Tom already mentioned a couple of interesting examples, like with hair and wardrobe and makeup, and the sound guy who wants to put on the lab in just the right way.
Yeah.
How can we do all this and maintain social distancing? Because that might be the first challenge that comes out, who knows when, July, August, September, October. Okay, if your production can show us that you can work and maintain 6 feet between everybody, you will have a cautionary yellow light to proceed. So people should be prepared to be, you know, creatively thinking of how we're going to answer these challenges.
Great, thanks. So Rian, what are your thoughts from a DP's perspective, especially on the crew side of things? And we need to unmute you. Sorry, Rian, you're still muted. There we go.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah.
There are challenges for crews, especially anyone who touches an actor or gets close to an actor. We're almost always close to actors. Lighting, or hair, especially hair, makeup, and wardrobe. I think different protocols are going to have to come into play. I think one of the panels mentioned we have to move forward on this. So I think things like longer work hours will probably be an option. Going into safe studios that they're deemed safe to work in. I think pre-testing prior to going into the studio. I can only speak about studio stuff for now because it's hard to think about doing location shooting. But one idea would be to, I know there's 15-minute tests coming out at some point, and hopefully that gets delivered to everyone and is proliferated throughout. So you'd going to work earlier than normal. You'd get tested, you'd wait 15 minutes, and you'd get into the studio. But you wouldn't go straight into the studio. You'd have to go into a clean room where you'd have to disrobe your stuff from home, and then you'd have to put on something that's already been prepared for you to work with your tools that have been cleaned and sanitized, and then you go into work. And I think there's a possibility that you might have to stay there. Maybe you'll do 12-hour days for 6 days and then have 4 days off or something like that. But I think it's workable, but there will have to be plans in place so that you can actually go into work in a clean environment, that you're not bringing in any kind of viruses that may affect actors and the shooting. There's a question here I just noticed. I'd love to address this from Peggy. The question here is, how do you think COVID-19 will affect the hiring process for newer film graduates and people looking to enter the industry? I don't think it will, in the sense that you'll still get hired, but you will have to go through before you actually go into the studio or onto set, you'll have to go through some sort of testing and some sort of clean environment, then making sure you have clean clothing and clean equipment, and then you get onto set to work. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're going to have to work through, and hopefully that gets sorted out. But I think it's possible as long as we prepare for it.
Great. Kent, from a first AD's perspective.
Well, it's along the lines of what Rian just mentioned. I've been doing some research on some of the other industries. I always kind of liken construction work to what we do a little bit in terms of the way our sites work. Let me just double check the source here. It's the Canadian Construction Association has just released some COVID-19 workplace guidelines that, when you start to read through it, and I can include a link later on to this, when you start to read through it, kind of applies to a lot of our workplaces, the way that they're going to start to treat construction sites. You know, proper hand washing stations, clean gear, when you're exchanging gear, how that all works. I think a lot of the things that everybody's brought up here are going to come into play at some point. in this recovery phase. And whether we get back to normal once vaccines are available or whatever, we can't really surmise yet how that's going to work. But in the short term, I do think that we can look at preparing our locations that way, spreading out the production process, perhaps even doing pre-lights with skeleton crew, bring a shooting crew in the next day, sort of string it out a little bit more, that process. Instead of perhaps longer days, it's more like just take that, what our latest production schedules have been. And, to Michael's point, we are used to working with smaller crews and doing things in a smaller way and still achieving some good results. That being said, like I come from more of an advertising background where we're not looking at, we got a one day to kind of take care of our client and shoot one thing. But I think that, again, even some of the production companies here in Toronto that are more specialized in commercials, they haven't released a lot of information, although Holiday Films, I think yesterday, put out a little statement on Facebook talking about how they want to go forward. Again, leaning on some technology solutions for communication offset, working in smaller crews on set, but then also instilling these kinds of protocols into our workplaces in a going forward way. Because again, we don't know. This might take 6 months to clear, might take 18 months. It might be 2 years before everybody around the world is kind of in a good place with this virus. So in those short-term periods to continue, and again, I want to make the point that Tom made and reiterate that, because I think it's really important. We don't do any of this kind of stuff until governments say, hey, it's okay to start to go back to work and in this approved manner. So I think that we're getting used to social distancing and when we go to the grocery stores, putting on a mask and gloves, and in fact, people stopped bumping elbows a few weeks ago. No one shakes hands or anything anymore. But like I was doing a couple of toy commercials a couple of weeks before we all shut down, and we're in close focus on a toy with a kid and a hand, and like there's 5 people very close together within 6 feet, all of them in that 6-foot radius. So we have to sort of figure out some of those things. I do think that close contact is going to be something that we're going to have to confront. We don't all have the luxury of being able to be 6 feet away if you have to do something that the creative demands. That being said, too, that's the other part of it, and then perhaps agencies will start to weigh in with this, but working with creative that supports what we're dealing with on set will help as well. And again, everyone's made great points. I'm going to just add that, Michael, you also said something that I think that really makes sense, is that we as film crews confront problems, roadblocks every day. We have new challenges every time we go out. So this just adds to that. And we can do that. We can overcome those things because we've all watched crews come together and do these things and achieve what people say can't be done or whatever. Not necessarily impossible, but we get together and problem solve, and that's one of our hallmarks of the people that we work with. So
yeah, that's great. I just wanted to expand on a question that came across from Peter that Michael answered by text, but it's about whether or not how realistic is it for actors and guest principals to react to the entire crew wearing protective gear. And I remember we had a conversation in the past, Tom and Michael both, about whether or not production should act like it's a closed set, like every shot is a closed set. So I wonder if you, Tom and Michael, Tom, starting with Tom, you could talk about that.
Yeah, it's something that we actually had on a preliminary conversation, and I've talked to the shows I'm working with about taking kind of a closed set protocol. In other words, when you have a closed set, if you have nudity or a sensitive scene, a lot of times you'll reduce the set to absolutely the minimum number of people that have to be on the set during that scene, and that's probably what we're going to do. And I think we'll see a little bit more of working in waves. In other words, the tech crew will come in, do things, and then they'll step out, and then you'll see a little bit more pre-lighting done. I think it'll be quite a different world. in terms of how the set works. Michael, do you want to speak onto that a little bit?
Well, I don't have too much, beyond what you people have said. You're absolutely right. And I'll just mention that in Ontario, going back to work will be greatly determined by Section 21 Film and Television Health and Safety Advisory Committee, which advises the Ministry of Labor, because the Ministry of Labor will have to say if it's okay to go back to work or not. And this committee is a bunch of terrific talents with great experience, and it includes, of course, reps from all the unions. And we've got Cynthia Clayton from the DGC there, and there's an ACTRA rep, of course, on that committee. And I am going to be curious about how we're going to deal with the actors, how this is going to work, because I said to Peter, maybe actors are going to have to go into a 14-day quarantine prior to doing any shoot. Well, I honestly don't know if that's practical or doable or affordable or realistic, or if it even, that probably doesn't solve the problem, it just addresses the problem. So no easy answers, but great people on that safety committee will be advising the ministry as to when we can go back. By the way, we can look not only to other provinces for guidance in how they're coming out of this, but even China, of course, because they're time-wise quite a bit ahead of us. And they opened up Wuhan today, as you may know. But if you want to fly from Wuhan to Beijing, you've got to be tested before you get on the plane, after you get off the plane in Beijing, and then you got to go into 14-day self-isolation before you can do anything in Beijing. So these kinds of practices might have to be considered in some fashion. And also, I predict there will be regional differences. So we'll see. It's going to be a complex issue. Brian.
Thanks. Rian, did you want to add to that? You'll have to unmute your phone, your mic again.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't think there's much that can be added to that, other than, one, testing. If we can have a process by which we test people that don't have to wait 14 days, that would help a lot. Like I said, there's this 15-minute test that's supposed to be coming out. If we could test people for 15 minutes, obviously you'd probably go through a test prior to boarding a plane. When you get here, you'd probably be tested again, and before you get on set, you'll be tested again, right? My thought, though, from a crew perspective, is that the last thing you'd want is for crews to be okay to work and then have them leave and come back again, and that just sort of slows the process down. So I'm thinking there's quite a possibility where crews may have to sleep over, as an idea. You come into work, you work your 12 hours or your 10 hours, you go to a dorm that's been prepared for you, you stay, you wake up, you work, but then you get 5 days off or something like that. I know the cops do it, firemen do it. They work, I think, 4 or 5, or I think 4 12-hour shifts, and they get 3 days off. So maybe it's something we might have to develop and try. But for actors coming in, it all depends on the actor, but I'm sure we can test prior, and I don't think 2 weeks would be actually necessary if you can get test results back fairly immediately.
I hope.
Tom, what do you think of that from a producer's perspective about crew sleeping over?
The crew I know, I wouldn't trust them sleeping together. So maybe you have better crews up there in Canada than us Americans. The big thing is we're going to have to impress upon people that whether we try to put people up or whether we do, I thought maybe less hours a day, maybe trying to enforce maybe some kind of prepackaged food. When I worked in Japan, we had bento boxes for breakfast, we had bento boxes for lunch, we had bento boxes for dinner. They're all pre-prepared meals that come in a tray that's sealed. And maybe we do that with maybe a shorter break for lunch and do kind of when everybody eats in place, because the idea of everybody eating together is a little scary. So maybe French hours, post-COVID French hours, might be a possibility. There's a lot of things we're talking about, and look, I'm hoping that people realize that ultimately this has to be a studio decision, because the amount of risk they're going to take to go back to work is pretty severe. But I think we as people who have worked in the industry have to kind of think through these issues ahead of time, because we all want to go back to work, but we want to go back to work and not get sick. So we have to put health first and figure that out. So it's been fascinating to talk to different studios, different producers in different countries, and try to figure this out.
Apparently from Carolyn Cox, Bruce Nuclear employees, the nuclear plant, they do a 2-week on, 2-week off position. So it's possible, right? And there's a question here from, oh, it's gone. I think Gregor Hagee had a question about paid sick days. What do you guys think about that? To stop, potential infections if you paid crews who were feeling sick and they had to go back home.
I think if we negotiate, I think that's going to be that's going to be a company by company thing for now, until we can get a little further down the line with negotiating with the unions, because there'll be all sorts of issues with that. So I do think that that's something to bring up with the individual production that you're working with. It would be my guess, just because the lead of how we're going to go back to work, that's going to be, I think, a big part of it. How do we make sure that people don't come to work sick? And if that's the best way to go, then that's the studio has to make that decision with the unions. And so I think that's something that's going to be negotiated on a high level. But I also think that it's possible that individual productions can work with their leadership to see if there's a way to come up with a policy for that in the interim, because I do think that's going to take a while to get negotiated.
Right. There was a question by Paige that Kent answered a bit of it, and I just wanted to expand on it. So the question was, do you see agencies moving into a direction where they're producing more digital computer-made content from archival footage rather than commercial shoots? And if I just wanted to expand on that, I know of a couple of companies that have reached out to us at Onset to solve the problem of there's two scenarios. Scenario one is you have like maybe a husband and wife team who have their own studio space with their own equipment, and they can shoot tabletop. But their challenge is to have a decent conversation with somebody offset, whether it's the production designers or the client, about what they're shooting, and they need to be able to communicate well. And that's where our offset access can really play into that, where you can have a visual communication with someone on a remote distance. And then the same thing happening as regions come back to life, like if once Canada, for instance, starts allowing productions to happen, but the client can't be there and they're used to being there. And maybe it's better if they're not there directly because it costs more money to fly. What's the options? So that's another area that our tool fits in really nicely, where we can allow a client to be on set as if they're standing next to somebody, with voice and video and being able to draw on the screen in real time to communicate visually. I'm just thinking, what are your ideas around a use like that in commercial productions and other type of productions? Maybe Kent, what do you think? You've used our tool before. You have an idea of what it can do?
Well, yes, and I think that that's something that we definitely need to confront, especially in commercials where we end up with our shooting crew, but we also end up with quite a lot of people from agencies and clients who join us for the shoot days. Whether they need to be on set, I think that we can definitely work on separating those two things. If we utilizing a tool like the Offset Assistant, where we can have people tune into what we're doing, basically show them a live feed of the set plus a live feed of the camera of what we're actually framing up for, and get approvals before shooting on product shots or performance or whatever, what have you. But do they actually need to be physically on set? No, not necessarily. I also look at some of the studios that we work in. Could they be amended to even just have a shooting area and then our client area, where, again, depending on how testings and things work, where we keep people separate as much as possible. Even utilizing the Onset Assistant, with its capabilities on a film set, on a commercial set particularly, keeping your, if you want to keep a very slimmed down crew when we're actually filming. The lighting crew, if they have to make a switch during the day, could be tuning in, know when it's time for them to come in, and we exit one group and bring in another group. It may come down to those kinds of things and those kinds of solutions. But I think that that's one of the first things that I started to think about in terms of commercial production is how do we make our days slimmer, and how do we make our crew and cast and client size smaller. First thing is to separate that agency client area crew away from just the location itself. If we can send them things where they're actually feeling like they're involved throughout the day, and we can get approvals, and we get communication, and we can change things, I mean, I think it would actually work really, really well. We've had to do it many times over the years where we've had to, don't have the opportunity to have a key creative with us. And, they're on a shoot in London and we're in Toronto shooting or something like that, where we're getting approvals, sending stills and or video across to them. This is a much more immediate way to do it, and would keep them feeling like they're still involved in the production.
That's great. Rian, I know we've talked about like how to use it for pre-lighting, that sort of situation, but I'm curious about the fact that we're all used to working in the space together, and what are the jobs and the roles and the, I guess, the actions that you could take where you don't necessarily have to be in the room at the same together?
Well, I mean, it works really well when you think about if you have to send a pre-light crew into a different studio or into a different location. It's great to be able to get feedback, immediate feedback from those crews. They can take pictures of that set that's being lit, send those pictures to you. You can either approve or disapprove. You can make changes. They can make those changes rather than trying to talk over the cell phone and have no visual representation of what's going on. So in that scenario, it works really well. Also, I think would work really well in scouting as well. So you send a crew out to do a tech scout for you. You're stuck on set. You can't make it. It's great to have, and I've done this on another show where I would create this document. It takes hours after. If I could just do it right then and there and send in those, so for instance, getting Sunseeker and showing where the sun's going to be based on where the director wants to shoot and what direction, and having where the actor's going to be, and I can set it all up, mark it all up, and send it away and get feedback. And maybe the DP might say, forget it, I don't want to shoot that way because the script says this, and there's going to be an issue with the sun, and we can have that discussion right then and there and make changes and have that. So in that scenario, it works really well, I think.
Yeah, Michael, can you see any scenarios where with your role as a director, even just like I was thinking about your situation where you're saying you like to be near the actor, and when we were talking about it before, you were even saying because sometimes there's something interfering on the floor that you can't see from the camera's perspective, and being able to see that from different angles to be able to make better decisions. How do you see that being used?
Yeah, one reason why I never hang out at Video Village is you don't see the whole set, and you don't see the little details between shots, and why are the actors so far apart? Oh, you go and walk around the corner to the set and go, yeah, because there's a coffee table there, get that coffee table out of there, whatever, So I think having those, if you use on set, you would not only be getting the feed from the individual cameras, but you definitely need some overall kind of security camera view that shows the whole set, the overall layout. And by the way, the promotion of this system and the popularization of its use might help us maintain some of our American shows, because as much as I think COVID-19 might inadvertently lead to more emphasis on Canadian production, we cannot afford to give up the American production that comes to Canada. And if a showrunner is hesitant to come up for health reasons or practical reasons, we are in trouble. And going through all these protocols and offering systems like Offset might make the difference between them deciding to do the show up here or not, whether they come or not. So I think it is very useful. I want to mention, by the way, Paige, her question really got me thinking about what will some of the differences be. It's going to be interesting, the changes that take place in the next year or two, but I mean, now I wish I was a director of animation shows, right? I'd be sitting pretty. But I think there will be more animation, and there will be more all digital shows. And I think there'll be more one-offs. There will be fewer long-run episodics. Some episodics where we did 20 in a season. I think that's going to be less because productions won't want to head into such a long time frame of commitment, realizing, as Tom said, well, if one actor gets sick, the whole thing's shut down. Wow, you're really left hanging if you promise somebody you do 20. I think there'll be less cross-border travel. That might be to our advantage. Shows with fewer cast and smaller crews. You know, it's going to make our imaginations run like, you know, when you first come out of film school, you try to think of that low-budget film you can do with 2 people up in your uncle's cabin.
Yeah.
Well, there's going to be a lot of movies and episodics with the 2 people up in the cabin. I got some good ideas for them, by the way, Tom. We should talk. and there'll be more. It's going to be to the advantage of shows that are seasonally variable, that don't have to be shot in a certain time frame in case suddenly, you know, there's a relapse in a certain region and production has to be pushed for 3 or 4 months. And you wanted to do the Christmas show up in the snow in the mountains, or you wanted to do the beach show. So it's going to force a different kind of creativity and adaptation. But I know our film people are going to be ready to take it on.
Can I just add to, I mean, this isn't going to go on forever, right? So we're talking about the short term here and not the long term, because let's assume there is going to be a vaccine or some sort of treatment for an infection. So in the short term, which could be anywhere for, I guess, 6 months to 18 months, we will get over this. Some of the protocols will stay that we're looking at, but, you know, people will come back and the jobs are going to come back and there will be travel. So we can't, I guess I don't want to have, I would hate to have this discussion go into the doom and gloom of this is how it's going to be forever, because it's not. So let's just say, you know, make sure that people know this is just a short term.
Yeah, and I think, but to your point, I think to add to it, and I've had this conversation with Tom a few times, this could be an opportunity for us to reevaluate how we do things normally. I know, Tom, you have a strong opinion about that. Would you like to share some of it?
Yeah, I don't want to get into too much details. This reminds me of the SAG strike several years ago, 10 or 15 years ago. I'm old. In that SAG and AFTRA split on that strike, and AFTRA went back to work and SAG didn't. And the difference was primarily AFTRA was television and digital, or at that time tape, and SAG was features and film. And instantly, all the studios went, even though we weren't ready for it, went to digital cameras, went to the Sony 900, to the Genesis, and eventually, which led to the Red and the Alexa. In that period, even though when all that stuff got shelved, the film business never really came back, and the business eventually has now become almost virtually digital, except for The Walking Dead, which I'm very, very proud to say still shoots on Kodak film. But I think for moving forward, you know, I think that there'll be changes that happen now that will affect the future in terms of how we do things. I think studio shoots are going to be easier, so there'll be an emphasis on studio. I think that having less people on set is going to be a necessary protocol. So I think we will see a movement that way. I am working on an experimental film right now, which pretty much limits the sets to having only 2 other people besides the actors on the set, 2. And we're moving forward with that test. And so there are ways to do things that that require less people on set. Doesn't require less people overall necessarily, but requires less people on set when you're shooting. And there are all sorts of benefits to that, including turnaround time. Not when you have to have all the hair and makeup and wardrobe and everybody move their chairs and move everything to the other side of the room and all those things. To have that not there will help. So there are some benefits that people are going to realize from this. I think we're going to see a more digital world in terms of how people do last looks. You know, as simple as that. I think you'll be doing that digitally. You know, the actor's going to walk in front of the camera, and you're going to look at the monitor. I think a lot of things are going to change.
That's a great opportunity for using remote viewing, like the onset technology, right?
Absolutely.
So I guess the crews could see what they need to see, and they can do the markups and make the changes and make advice, and yeah, that would work really well. Mm-hmm. Looking forward to it.
we just have to put it into our process. Like, that's part of the whole thing, the way we communicate, the way we do things. It's not necessarily changing it wholesale, but it might be tweaking a little thing here and there that allows us to do these things and still achieve similar kind of creative. It doesn't necessarily have to be two people in a cabin in the woods, although that could be interesting. You know, like, there's still going to be a desire eventually for something other than two people, or, you know, like we see with the way the late night shows are broadcasting right now, basically the way we're doing it right now. You know, after a while, that's great right now. It's filling the gap, it's filling the void. But we're going to want to do more things eventually, and audiences are going to want more things. So eventually that's going to come around, I think. Yeah.
Lynn, do you have any questions do you want to ask from any of our attendees, or questions you see gaps in?
I actually do not. I have taken pages of notes because I love this conversation. And I think throughout the conversation, there have been moments where I felt very fatalistic and how will we ever get back to work? And I think we've come around here at the end towards a far more optimistic point of view, and an understanding that we are going to go back to work as a film industry encompassing all sorts of what today's content world encompasses. And this I see as an opportunity to sort of embrace what Tom was saying and re-looking at some of our processes and reimagining in a way that will drive our content, our world of television, world of film to the future in different ways, yet still meeting what we also know to be a global appetite for our work by all of our friends and family and the world that is stuck at home, looking to us to provide them from that distraction from our daily worries and concerns outside of the entertainment industry and just the global scare of it all. So I think I think you guys have covered it, but I think that we've also done a really good job of presenting both the negative and the positive opportunities of this new future.
See, there's a couple of questions that are still here. One from Derek, which is, I think, a good question along the lines of what we're talking about here in Canada for sure, and perhaps it'll happen in the States as well. There'll be tremendous, I'll just quote from him, there'll be tremendous pressure for employers to provide a safe workplace. There's no doubt protocols before production, during production will have to be very well established. It'd be good if standards were universal by province at least. Do we think that's possible, and who would lead this? Again, doing some research this week, you know, like you're right, it's very, standards are broken up very regionally here in Canada. You know, like the Toronto Film Office has a great list of protocols that we can follow. If you go in, dive into their documents, there's a lot there actually that we, you know, kind of take for granted that everybody practices, but when you see it in print, step by step, how you go into a space, how hair and makeup should deal with an actor. These kinds of things are actually put into place, but it's very regional. So is it possible, Michael, maybe you could actually talk to this a little bit more because you do sort of work throughout Canada a little bit more. You know, is it possible to have a Canada-wide protocol in terms of this developed, and who would lead that? Or, you know, we have the OMBC, we have the, you know, Ontario Creates, we have the Toronto Film Commission, we have all these different entities that have their own little protocols. Is there a way to standardize it across the country, do you think?
I know, because that's a good question. Because I've been lucky to work in just about every province, so I would hate to see that made even harder. But I mean, it's hard to say because some things obviously are federally decided. Like the federal government can say that no, airplanes are going to come in from any other country; they won't be allowed to land, or only at certain cities. But as I mentioned earlier, generally, I think the primary decisions are going to come from the Ministry of Labor in each province, and in Ontario, the Section 21 Film Health and Safety Committee will be advising them. And by the way, they have reps from Ontario Creates and Film Toronto, and as I said, all the unions and DGC. And
little DGC pitch. There you go.
So they come with protocols. I don't know if Ontario will be the first, but they will come up with the Ontario protocols. And of course, they have to take into consideration anything that's happening nationally. And they do consider what's going on. There's a BC similar committee and a California committee. And they will be looking at what they do. And obviously, they share information and ideas. So you're right. We're going to have transitional protocols. But I'm hoping Ryan's right that eventually we can get back to normal after there's probably a vaccine for this, when it's not such a frightening virus and more like a typical, our concerns would then be more on the level of a typical bad flu virus, which does not typically shut down productions in various regions.
Yeah, I think we will get back to work. We'll be okay. I think we'll be okay. You know, there'll be obviously be some practices left over from once we start working. If there's still issues, there'll be practices that we'll have to follow, and it will just sort of inform how we work in the future. There's a question here by an honest person talking about rotating crews. Please don't do it. It goes, please don't go to rotating crews. Crews want full-time employment, and they will just jump to another show if production, I guess, has them on rotating basis. So this proposal will not solve the issue. In fact, could make control more difficult, considered daily labor also. Well, that's an interesting concept. I don't know if you can have rotating crews per se. I think crews will be stuck with the production, because the last thing you'd want is to have one clean crew be in and then bring in another crew that you have to sort of certify that's clean. You know, but things like rotating DPs, we have that per episodes. Rotating directors, we have that per episodes. Another part of the question here is if a DP or creative like a director or DP needs to go on sick leave, will production stop?
Yeah, Ryan, I want to address that one. I mean, obviously, if the director gets sick, everything shuts down. You can't replace the director. Come on, people. What are we talking about?
What thing to do?
Well, I don't know.
Just wait, there's other directors?
Let's actually talk about that on a more global level, Michael, because what's interesting about this process is ultimately this is going to come down to when a studio is going to feel comfortable restarting a show and be able to go to work. And there'll have to be thoughts put into, because of the amount of risk. I just don't see insurance companies being able to insure shows the way they used to insure them. So you would, I don't know if y'all are aware, but typically you would have a DP, potentially have a director have a physical and on a feature, and have certain key actors have physicals, and those are key elements. And so the discussion of what now becomes a key element, and how long you have to shut down if you lose that key element, is going to be the thing. Not necessarily. You would shut down if you lost your director, of course, but how long that shutdown would be necessary for before you would be able to start back up again is going to be a huge question, way above my pay grade in terms of the future, because at a certain point, if studios stand to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars a week, which is what they would do when they shut down, they have to have some kind of protocol for replacement at some point. And what those are, like I said, way above my pay grade, but it's going to be a different world a little bit, I think. And I hope you're right. I think it's great to have, the director be stay with it all the way through. But if that director's out for a month or two, what does that mean for production? And I think that's a world that we haven't fully explored yet. And at what level? Is it a TV show? On a feature, obviously, it could be different than TV, and TV could be different than commercials. It's going to be like I said, a different world.
Yeah, good points, Tom. And it'd be interesting to see from insurers' point of view how they handle a virus like this. Like, will it be included in force majeure or not? Somebody, Brendan Brady, put in a comment saying that he was on a show and the insurer said they would not cover COVID. So, you know, it's interesting how every aspect of the industry is going to have to look at this and figure out how to adapt and how we can work together to get going again.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I just want to switch gears for a second, and because we're nearing the end of our webinar, I just want to screen share for a second and just show you how the onset assistant works, just really quickly. And I'm just going to screen share here. So this is what the interface looks like. It's very simple, and you're able to draw on the screen in real time. You can do this in channels. So the way this is working, you'll be able to do this whether you're standing 6 or 8 feet away from each other or 300 miles away from each other. And the way it works in channels is you can switch between channels. This allows you to have discrete conversations. So 2 people can be in this conversation talking about the framing of a shot. Somebody else could be in another conversation with different footage, talking about continuity issues that they're dealing with now or dealing with shortly. And it just allows people to be more creative and facilitates much faster communication. And then there's a library you can go to where an operator can grab a clip for you and give you playback really quickly and load it into a channel. And so it allows the operator to give you up to 12 different people playback at the same time, and you're not having to wait around. And then the whole system works wirelessly, so you're using tablets to see the video feed and communicate with each other like a video walkie-talkie. And that's pretty much it. That was a short pitch.
It's a very impressive system, Brian, and I think a lot of productions and studios will be looking to consider using it. I mean, it has obvious advantages. So.
Thanks. We'll just go back really quickly to any final questions, and then we can wrap this up. I just want to thank the panelists too for their time. It's been great to hear your professional experience and opinion on where we're at and where we're going to be. Let's see, what questions do we miss here? Oh, there's one here. I think we answered this before, but it's what do producers think about productions needing a full-time safety consultant? I think, Tom, I think you answered that question already about having a, was it a medical, or maybe it was Rian. Rian, were you the one who answered that question before?
No, I don't think this question's been answered directly. I mean, having a full-time safety consultant would be probably good, but I think that consultants should probably be more specific to the issues at hand and not just an overall safety consultant, because we have those on set. We have our safety reps, whether it's an 873 or 667. So that's already on set. But if it's to deal with the virus, then or any sort of viral contaminant, maybe someone who's specific that has a medical background would probably be advantageous to having on set. And they would probably you probably want them to help coordinate making sure you have a clean set and a clean process, so to help the studios figure out what they have to do to make sure that everybody on sets is safe. There's another question in here as well. Does anybody have anything to add before I push that through?
I've talked to a couple of studios about the potential of having, rather than having an additional EMT or medic on the set, having potentially a nurse on the set who's got more medical training and would be specifically dealing with prophylactic procedures in terms of keeping things clean and areas clean, not just on set, but in the trailers, in the hair and makeup trailers specifically, I think is going to be an issue. So there's quite a few things to think through.
I would add that to that. Like, I think, you've talked about maybe going to more studio-based shooting for the short term. But again, that might become like a business thing for some studios out there to ensure that they've done their work to provide a very clean, sanitized work environment. It's almost like looking at like a factory floor where it's working with sensitive product or whatever, where crews have to kind of go in with knowing they're walking into a sanitized environment, and then those kinds of things, which we did talk about a little bit earlier today. But I think that going forward, having a some personnel dedicated to that will be necessary for sure.
Yeah, we talked about ultraviolet rooms as well, like they have in hospitals and places where you would have a place to take all your gear in at the end of the day.
Yeah,
have ultraviolet light to kill the germs.
Absolutely. Cleaning gears. I mean, a lot of the suppliers here in Toronto, you know, when we did the shutdown, spent that week cleaning all their gear. But again, we're dealing with their own company standards right now. There's no real standard yet. It might come through our film commissions or whatever, but we're going to need to have those things in place as we go forward in the next few months, for sure.
This is another question about implementation of these practices might be too expensive for Canadian productions without a significant cut to labor costs. That's from Peter Mitchell. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What do you guys think? What do you think, Michael?
That's a tough one, and you know, Peter's a very experienced director, so he's been there quite a few times, and he knows how you know, creativity is directly connected to budgets and everything else. So I think the next round of negotiations, for example, with the guilds and unions and the Producers Association, is going to be a tough one and probably protracted. Because most of the things that we're talking about in terms of going back into production while COVID is an issue, they all cost money. It's going to be slower and more laborious, and you know, take more care, and maybe more people watching certain things like sanitizing the set, etc. So, and just the way they do lunch and everything, right? It's just it's more labor and the craft service, everything, right? So it's going to cost more, and that's going to be a factor, and probably the guilds and unions will have to creatively respond to that. We'll see. I trust those smart people to work out something. Thank God I'm not on the negotiating committee in the upcoming round.
That's great. Thanks for the answer. There's one more question. I'm not sure I understand it though.
It's an interesting question because it's from Gregor Hagee again, DP in Toronto. Given recent press about air pollutants and vaping, so apparently if you vape or there's lots of air pollution, people can get more sick with this virus. As a possibility of risk for worsening COVID infections, could onset use a haze
in the atmosphere? Yeah.
Atmosphere needs to. Oh, right. So should we not use haze, basically, or atmosphere on set? That's interesting. I thought. I mean, I don't know if the amount of haze we use on set is comparable to vaping. Like, that would be interesting to find out. Get a test going. I really don't know how to answer that, Gregor. Other than it'd be interesting to find out if we can get that tested and see if there's an actual impact of hazing on set.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess that makes you look at a whole bunch of practices we do that suddenly have affect our breathing that might be a factor.
Yeah.
Yeah, hadn't considered smoke machines and all those kind of things being a new risk.
The short answer, I think, for production would be yes, it'll be curtailed if there's a risk to it. It's a nice thing to have. I actually love that look, but I think that we would probably limit our use of smoke if we thought there was any risk to it. It's just not absolutely necessary. So we'd want to try to figure that out ahead of time.
We'll use filters, more filters.
Both in post. It'll be fixed in post.
Yeah.
Use the technology.
Post. Yeah.
There's an interesting comment or kind of question from somebody who's saying that obviously with people home, people are spending a lot more time watching Netflix and whatnot. So the streaming services are, raking it in right now, and they're saying, should those increased profits be turned towards the increased cost of creation? Well, yeah, and they should be turned back into production. And it's interesting how this virus affects so many issues. And I think this just reignites the whole issue of streaming services like Netflix operating in Canada and not having to put money into Canadian production. I know they offered to put some money into Canadian production, but there not being a formula to directly keep more of that money in Canada. I think that this just reignites that whole debate. So it just permeates everything.
Yeah, it's a good question to end on too. I mean, yeah, let's invite all those streaming services to pay us more money to make great content.
Well,
All right, thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I think we'll end it here. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to all of you for joining us from home, and everyone stay safe, and yeah, have a good weekend.